Okay, here we go. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Please give us a few minutes while we wait for others to join in. Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to today's virtual tour of the Timken Museum. We're really excited to have you with us this morning. A few housekeeping things before we get started. Please keep yourselves muted throughout today's presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Zoom chat function by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen that says chat in order to type your question, and we'd be happy to address any questions or comments at the end of today's tour. If you're joining us over Facebook Live, welcome to you as well. You can also ask any questions you may have using the comment section on Facebook, and we'll be monitoring those comments and answering those questions at the end of the tour as well. Lastly, this tour is being recorded and streamed live and will be posted to our social media channels once the tour is over. If you would like to rewatch this tour or watch other tours put on by the Timken Museum previously, please check out our YouTube or Facebook pages to find those. Without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce our docent, Eleanor Merrill, who will be presenting on the Feast Your Eyes. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'll be turning things over to you, Eleanor.
Thanks, Renata, and welcome everyone. Greetings, and welcome to today's virtual tour with the Timken Museum. Now, art has the ability, as we all know, to inspire people. It can make us think, dream, and find new meaning in our lives. And it can also make us super hungry. Food paintings and depictions of edible things have been part of famous artwork since the very beginning. From ancient Egyptians carving depictions of crops and breads on tablets to hyper-realistic grapes painted by Dutch masters, food and art have a long and rich relationship. So I invite you to join me for an art-inspired food tour. And because this is a virtual tour, you can even eat in the galleries. So we begin our tour in ancient Egypt. Among the ancient civilizations, the Egyptians enjoyed better foods than most, and that's thanks to the presence of the Nile River, which flowed through most of the settled area in Egypt, and it fertilized the land with periodic flooding and provided a source of water, of course, for irrigating the crops and watering the livestock. The proximity of Egypt to the Middle East also made trade easy, and therefore the Egyptians enjoyed foodstuffs from foreign countries as well. So what did they eat? Well, nutrition in ancient Egypt centered around bread, beer, and plant products. The staple of ancient Egyptian cuisine was bread, maybe not surprising, and it was featured at almost every meal and eaten by both the rich and the poor. While emmer, rich in protein, carbohydrates, and various vitamins, was the primary grain used in baking, barley was also sometimes used. Making bread was a strenuous task, and it was done by women who first ground the grains through a grinding mill to form the flour. Interestingly, sand was added into the grinder to speed up the process. And as you may imagine, that resulted in the bread with sand in it. the cause of many of the dental problems like tooth decay, which we know about from the teeth of mummies. The dough formed by mixing the flour with water and yeast was sometimes seasoned with cilantro, coriander seeds, and dates, though typically eaten unseasoned among the poor. It was then placed in a clay mold and cooked in a stone oven, and the molds came in different sizes and shapes, like human figures, fish, and various animals. You may be surprised to see what might be the first evidence of the use of straws by humans. It seems that ancient Egyptians drank their beer through a straw. In ancient Egypt, wine was preferred by the upper class, but beer was the staple for the working class Egyptians, an essential part of their diet. The drink was consumed not so much for pleasure, but rather out of necessity, as water from the Nile wasn't clean and safe enough for people to drink. Beer was such an important part of the Egyptian diet that it was even used as currency. Workers were paid in beer, and it still remains the most popular alcoholic beverage in the country by far, accounting for 54% of all alcohol consumption. And if those of you who visited Egypt know how popular beer is. And we've also seen beer as typically used in other ancient cultures, and even in more modern times in the 17th century, in Holland, for example, when it was not safe to drink water. Like most modern African beers, but unlike European beer, Egyptian beer was very cloudy with plenty of solids and highly nutritious. It was nutritious, quite reminiscent of gruel, and it was an important source of protein, minerals, and vitamins. So next to bread and water, plant products such as vegetables, fruits, legumes were most popular in the Egyptian diet. This painting on the wall of a deceased couple's offering chapel shows grapes, snake cucumbers, figs, and a fruit called persea, all to feed a deceased couple for eternity. Other fruits and vegetables, including gourds, celery, onions, beans, and peas, could all be cooked into a stew or served as a side dish. Archaeological evidence suggests that Egypt imported oil from Mesopotamia, though they did know how to make their own oil from sesame, lettuce, and radish seeds. That must have been quite a combination. Now, ancient Egyptians did have moderate access to meat and other animal products. Fish and domesticated cattle, pigs, sheep, and poultry all served as a good source of fats and proteins within Egyptian nutrition. With these things in mind, you probably wouldn't be surprised to learn that the average macronutrient ratios within ancient Egyptian nutrition were around 45 to 55% carbohydrates, 25 to 35% protein, and 15 to 25% fats, not dissimilar to our diet today. And just like today also, if you didn't produce your own food, you went to the market, and guess what? The ancient Egyptians, just like us, needed help remembering what to buy. This papyrus is one of the most ancient shopping lists to have survived. Indeed, this rough piece of papyrus with indecipherable words scrawled on it, once translated, begins with greetings from a man to his brother, then asks him to shop for a number of items, including poultry, bread, chickpeas, kidney beans, and something called fenugreek leaves. Now, when I was growing up, my mother always insisted that I bring a hostess gift to my friends' parents when I spent the night at their house. This small fresco proves that my mother was old-fashioned, really old-fashioned. It turns out that the practice of presenting hostess gifts dates back to the ancient Greeks. In antiquity, however, it was the host, not the guest, who presented the gifts. This small fresco is an example of how the Romans played the hostess game and how the generosity was captured by ancient Roman artists. Still life with peaches and water jar belongs to a category of still life paintings which are known as xenia, drawing on the Greek word for guest friendship or hospitality. So xenia or hospitality was shown to guests who were far from home by accommodating them and presenting them with the means to be comfortable, a bed, food, a bath, and so on. This wasn't just a matter of being polite, but was considered a religious obligation for the Greeks, an idea which was preserved in both Homeric epic and mythology. The Greeks believed that Zeus Xenios, Zeus's role as protector of guests, wandered in disguise with travelers, testing the capacity of hosts to be generous and tolerant. Archaeologists discovered that wall painting, still life with peaches and water jar, in the House of the Stags in Herculaneum, once a wealthy seaside town on the Bay of Naples, just a few miles north of Pompeii. And like Pompeii, Herculaneum was destroyed by the eruption of nearby Mount Vesuvius on August 24th, 79 CE. It was among the fanciest houses in town, oriented to take full advantage of Herculaneum's panoramic sea view. The small xenia paintings at the House of Stags were not unusual. Many rich houses, especially houses and villas which were located along the coast, where visitors from Rome might want to travel to escape the summer heat or political turmoil, were outfitted with special guest quarters. Xenia paintings are frequently found in these rooms, announcing to the guests that they would be lavished with the finest foods and serviceware while in the house. So I suspect my mother had a different idea when sending me with hostess gifts, more an apology for whatever trouble I might get in than a display of wealth and social importance. Still, her insistence that I present myself with hostess gift in hand demonstrates that showing our best and accommodating guests with grace has never gone out of style. Now, given that these were accommodations for the wealthy, we might expect to find a Roman banquet taking place. This is also from Herculaneum. We see a man who drinks from a type of drinking vessel that has two openings, and it's called a rhyton. His female companion wears a sheer garment and a golden net over her hair. A female servant attends to the couple, proffering a small box. The table in front holds a set of silver vessels for mixing wine. The whole scene represents an idealized Greek drinking party, a pleasurable sight for the guests of this first century Roman household. So I think we've had our fill of the ancient world and ready to get a taste of the Middle Ages. As you might expect, the cultivation, preparation, and consumption of food formed the framework for daily labor and leisure in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Illuminated manuscripts offer images of the chores that produce sustenance, cooking techniques, popular dishes, grand feasts, and dinners of within different social classes. And food had powerful symbolic meaning in Christian devotional practice, as well as in biblical stories and saintly miracles, where it nourished both the body and the soul. Set before a luxurious cloth of honor, which is that red printed cloth hanging from the ceiling and back, the elevated banquet scene in the background features upper-class diners and an obedient servant arranged symmetrically in their proper places around a carefully laid table. In contrast, at the disheveled table in the foreground, rowdy peasants ply each other with drink while one of them falls asleep. A woman cavorts with a man seated on the floor, and a server crudely lifts her dress. You see that on the right. At left, Valerius Maximus, who's in blue, author of the text about ancient customs and heroes, gestures to this orderly scene to explain the merits of temperance to the Emperor Tiberius. But note that no one is actually eating their food. Medieval people had what one might call an uncomfortable relationship with food. Of course, sustenance was both essential for survival and a source of pleasure. But when allowed to run wild, pleasure could lead to sin. And this is where it all began: gluttony, overindulging in food or drink. This was one of the 7 deadly sins of medieval European church. In the medieval view, the story of Adam and Eve established gluttony as man's original and worst sin. Tempted by the snake, they ate the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge and were banished from the Garden of Eden, causing the fall of mankind. We see another feast with little eating in this striking Last Supper illumination from this 1,000-year-old manuscript or Book of Prayers from Regensburg, Germany. Christ is seated at the center of a semicircular table crowded with his 12 apostles. Judas sits alone on the opposite side, closest to us. He devours a piece of bread with a blackbird, a symbol of the devil, perched on it, reflecting the biblical passage where Jesus predicts that the one to whom he gives bread will betray him. Many medieval Last Supper images display bread, fish, and wine. In this case, there's perhaps one of the earliest depictions of a pretzel, a bread that was often included in late German images of the scene. In this page from a calendar, the ultimate in upper crust gluttony is represented by the feasting Janus, whose 2 heads allow him to eat twice as much as a normal man. The table brims with vessels and utensils, suggesting the abundance of food found in January when farming work was replaced by feasting on the fall harvest. So thus far, we've been looking at depictions of people in activities involving food. Let's now take a look at a Renaissance court portraitist who seems to take to heart the idea that food makes the man. In 1590, Giuseppe Arcimboldo painted his royal patron, the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, as Vertumnus, the ancient god of vegetation and the seasons. With peapod eyelids and a gourd for a forehead, he looks less like a king than a crudité platter. Rudolph's 29-year rule as Holy Roman Emperor set an unprecedented era for the appreciation of art, with much of this cultivation pushed by Rudolph himself. The acceptance of art is what allowed Arcimboldo, who served the Habsburg family for more than 25 years, to thrive in his court, especially with the unprecedented, unique style he came to be known for. You can see from his court portrait on the right, which depicts Rudolph II's father, Maximilian II, that Arcimboldo started out his career painting in the more traditional style of court portraits. Arcimboldo's unique portraits using the fruits of nature were an expression of the Renaissance mind's fascination with riddles and puzzles, and his pictures of human heads composed of objects were very much admired by his contemporaries. He was always up to something capriccioso or whimsical, whether it was inventing a harpsichord-like instrument, writing poetry, or concocting costumes for royal pageants. He likely spent time browsing the Habsburgs' private collections of artworks and natural oddities which they collected in the Kunstkammer, considered a predecessor of modern museums. The paintings were meant to amuse, but according to a Princeton art professor, they also symbolize, and I quote, the majesty of the ruler, the copiousness of creation, and the power of the ruling family over everything, end of quote. As for Arcimboldo, his creative composite portraits and his serious visual jokes reveal him to be the true Vertumnus, master of changes and transformations. Now, perhaps as fantastical as Arcimboldo's portraits are the pomp and majesty that accompanies a coronation. And if you're like me, you watched at least some of the recent coronation of King Charles III. But what I was really interested in was the food. We learned from the royal family that the official dish of the coronation big lunch, a charity event which was held at various locations across the country, was quiche with spinach, fava beans, tarragon, and cheddar. A tasty, if rather safe, choice. But had Charles really wanted to make a splash, he could have taken the lead from another past king, one who almost 350 years ago went all out at his coronation feast. James II ascended to the throne of England, Scotland, and Ireland in 1685. He came from a family he knew how to party. His older brother, the previous King Charles II, was nicknamed the Merry Monarch for lavishing a fortune on his mistresses. When James took the throne, he threw one of the most extravagant coronations the British Isles had ever seen. But that was all part of the job. In order to be a good ruler, you had to show the magnificence of the court, and magnificent it was. According to a detailed account of the feast held at Westminster Hall, described in the History of the Coronation of the Most High, Most Mighty, and Most Excellent Monarch James II by Francis Sandford, there were almost 1,500 dishes served. I would not want to be the food preparer for this feast. Here's a listing of just the meats that were contained in 144 dishes. It was deliberately way more food than they could consume, and it would be considered a disgrace if they finished it all. In fact, customs of the time dictated that guests control themselves despite the mountain of food in front of them. That's because the ritual really wasn't about eating. It was about appearances. Sound familiar? Just what we saw in our prior works. Now, you might wonder where all the food at the coronation banquets came from. Well, more than likely, much of it came to England through the Netherlands, whose ports in the 17th century became the busiest in Europe, with a huge shipbuilding industry supported by the ready availability of lumber and the knowledge of wind power. Exotic luxuries from all over the world poured into Dutch ports, fruits from across the Mediterranean, tobacco from the New World, spices and precious gems from India, tea, silk, and porcelain from China and Japan. Naturally, the Dutch citizens wanted to celebrate, and they wanted to immortalize the trappings of their newfound luxury. So Dutch artists started to incorporate these highly valued imports into their paintings. In the early decades of the 17th century, colorful entrebiche or breakfast pieces, which typically show the ingredients of a simple meal, were in vogue. Peter Claes was foremost among the artists credited with helping to introduce this type of still life into the Dutch painting tradition. And the Timken is fortunate to have his still life from 1627, which shows a richly painted, though humble, spread of mostly local products, representing what an ordinary meal in Haarlem, where Claes lived, might look like for its typical residents. A goblet of dark beer, a brazier glowing with hot embers, arranged around the pewter plate in the foreground, and displayed in elegantly across that plate are a couple of smoked herring, the basic meal hanging over the table's edge, casting a shadow into our space. But notice that a few of the objects kind of look amiss. The beer glass is half empty. The charcoal is starting to burn out. Claes provides gentle reminders of the impermanence and fragility of life, a theme we see more prominently depicted in another of Claes's works done just 1 year later. In this still life, close observation and realistic detail operate in tension, and we have explicit symbolism. The toppled glass, gap-toothed skull, and the guttering wick of an oil lamp all serve as stark symbols of life's brevity and the inevitability of death, as prominently depicted in the skull. And the skull is an object called a memento mori, meaning remembrance of death. These types of works were called vanitas paintings, referring to the folly or vanity of material possessions. Working with a limited palette of grays and browns, Claes carefully describes the surfaces of these unsettling objects. By arranging them on a pitted stone ledge, he connects the picture space to our own, making the message all the more compelling. So, are you ready to lighten up a bit? Well, France is the perfect place with this genre work by Jean-Baptiste Cruz from 1756. At first glance, Broken Eggs, a 1756 oil painting, as I mentioned, by Jean-Baptiste Cruz, seems to depict a fairly innocuous domestic scene of a young woman on the floor next to a basket of broken eggs, while a young man is being scolded by the family matriarch. The subtext, however, is a little different, because here the broken eggs symbolize the loss of the young woman's virginity. Now, I realize you've had quite a lot to digest thus far, but I hope you've saved room for our main course. Well, maybe not too much room. It's dinner time at a home in the Netherlands, and we'll join an artist you all know, Vincent van Gogh, but with a work which I'm pretty sure will surprise you. The Potato Eaters is the first really ambitious painting that Van Gogh made, And it's very different from what we expect of Van Gogh, which is a landscape and bright colors. This is an interior view, intentionally dark, only the palest light coming from the lantern warming the faces of the peasants. These people, bound to the earth, are eating their meager meal of potatoes. The painting had to depict the harsh reality of country life, so Van Gogh gave the workers coarse faces and bony working hands. Nuenen, a village in the southern Netherlands, was the perfect setting for a peasant painter, and that's exactly what Vincent wanted to be. He lived in Nuenen with his parents. The village was home to farmers, rural laborers, and weavers, who Vincent sketched and painted whenever he could. His stay in Nuenen was one of the most important and most productive periods of his life, producing a quarter of his total output here from December of 1883 to November of 1885, 2 years. His intention for this painting was to depict peasant life how it really was. And in the Netherlands, that meant potatoes. Art historians believe the work was based on this work by a fellow Dutch artist whose peasant family at the table has an undeniably similar composition. The de Groot family are the subjects of the potato eaters. They lived in a farm cottage during Vincent's time in Nuenen, and he could often be found there. After many preliminary studies, he painted this strong group portrait in his studio in May of 1885. And note that this is the only group portrait Van Gogh would ever make. With a large work featuring multiple figures, Van Gogh hoped to prove himself to the outside world. He'd been an artist only for a few years, and he felt the time had come. The subject, a peasant family eating their daily meal, was a popular one at the time, but he deliberately chose a difficult composition to show that he was on his way to becoming a good figure painter. And since he had little experience with full-length portraits, he decided to paint the figures sitting down. He spent months practicing painting heads, preceded by dozens of preparatory studies. The composition consists of 5 figures seated around a table. The 2 people on the left are eating from a large plate with steaming hot potatoes, while the 2 on the right are serving and drinking coffee. The 5th person is a girl who's standing at the table back to us, and this was common at the time for children. Van Gogh has positioned her like this to immediately draw the viewer into the scene. This is early, as I mentioned, in Van Gogh's career. And so you may note some technical difficulties he had. For example, he struggles with perspective and foreshortening of the human body. But what seems to be important for Van Gogh was to create this authentic relationship between the rough application of the paint and the rough qualities of the subjects. In a letter to his brother Theo, he said, and I quote, "I'm plowing on my canvases as they're doing in the fields," end quote. Potato Eaters was classed by its creator as the best from this period of his career, and Vincent was very sensitive to criticism about it, which unfortunately is what he generally received after its completion. At a time when bright impressionism was rising across Europe, few showed interest in a drab piece which was attempting to cover the social ills of the Dutch peasant class. Now, the family Van Gogh depicts can only afford potatoes for their main meal. Of course, if you could afford it, you had meat as part of your dinner. And if your last name was Bacon, nominative determinism, the idea that someone's name might end up influencing their career choice or future actions, there was only one way this was going to end. Figure with Meat, a 1954 painting by the Irish-born artist Francis Bacon. Permeated by tormented visions of humanity, Francis Bacon's paintings embodying the ethos of the post-war era. Beginning in the 1940s, Bacon created a series of works modeled on Diego Velázquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X. And in these various works, he transformed the celebrated masterpiece into a grotesque, almost nightmarish compositions. Bacon made some 45 versions of Velázquez's masterpiece, and this was the special one that made it to stardom. Here he replaced the noble drapery framing the central figure with two sides of beef, directly quoting Rembrandt and Chaim Soutin's haunting images of raw meat. In Bacon's version, animal carcasses hang at the Pope's back, creating a raw and disturbing crucifixion-like composition. The Pope's hands, elegant and poised in Velázquez's version, are rough-hewn and gripping the church's seat of authority in apparent terror. His mouth is held in a scream, and black striations drip down from the Pope's nose to his neck. It's as if Bacon picked up a wide house painting brush and brutishly dragged it over the face. Some critics consider this work to be a modern-day version of a Vanitas painting, which we just looked at, using food imagery to represent death and the fleeting nature of existence, while others consider it a critique on religious authority. By linking the Pope with these carcasses, Bacon allowed the viewer to interpret the Pope alternately as a depraved butcher or as a victim like the slaughtered animal hanging behind him. And if you think you've seen this image before, you might want to thank Tim Burton, the irreverent and subversive filmmaker. He featured the painting in his 1989 film Batman. Criminals led by the Joker break into an art museum and they vandalize various works of art. But upon seeing Figure with Meat, the Joker orders it spared and left intact, reminding, quote, "I kind of like this one, leave it," end of quote. In closing, any respectable compendium of food paintings has to feature this iconic series, potentially some of the most widely known images of the 20th century, which is either a cynical cash grab or a brilliant pop art landmark, depending on your viewpoint. The series by Andy Warhol consists of pieces in total, all depicting a different flavor of Campbell's soup. Created using semi-automated techniques, Warhol's work represented a dramatic turn away from the world of fine art and concepts of painterliness. Warhol would go on to repeat this trick over the course of his career, continually returning to the soup cans that caused one of the 20th century's greatest artistic and public commotions. People remain divided to this day about his motives and legacy, but you can't deny that his technique was effective. His controversial work would see him become the highest-priced living American artist and a creative icon that transcended the world of art. This brings our tour to an end. I hope you found the virtual tour I served you today to your satisfaction. and welcome any questions or comments.
Okay. I found this on the web for the series by Andy Warhol.
It's odd. My work is speaking back to me. In any event, gratuities are always appreciated. Thank you.
All right, so it seems we do have one question from Facebook, and the question is, did they drink beer in what? Glass? So I am not sure exactly when this question was
Say that
asked.
question. I'm sorry, I had seen the questions and I'm not seeing them now. So would you restate the question, Renata?
Yes. Did they drink beer in what? Glass?
Did they drink beer?
In what?
Oh, in what? In typically in gourds or pottery.
Mm.
Yeah, pottery, in fact, pottery, I think back to other civilizations, within the African civilization, beer was brewed in pottery. And it was believed that it was, created a really fine tasting beer. But remember, as I said, this beer was quite different than the beer as we know it. It was cloudy, it had a lot of protein in it. And it was drank, for nutritional purposes.
Mhm. All right. If anyone else has a question, please put it in the chat. But okay. So Ryan S says, Eleanor, you didn't cover any Last Suppers. We know there would be bread and wine, but do you know if the food and drink is consistently similar in those, or does it vary?
Actually, I did show one Last Supper, the 1,000-year-old illumination, which did show bread and wine, and showed, because it was German, it showed a pretzel, which I noted showed up, does show up in many other of the German Last Supper works. Oh, can I put the image up again? Yeah, I can go. Let's see if I can go all the way back up. That one was pretty early. Let's see. Before that. Oh, no, it was, I'm sorry. It was, I might as well go through all the slides at this point. There we go. Sorry about that. And remember, gluttony, even in other, as I mentioned, last supper works, you don't see a lot of people eating, gluttony and was, a sin. And so, it was not common to see whether, it was the upper class being depiction, the nobility, or, not the upper class, to see folks gorging on food.
Moore says, thank you. That was very informative. And then Ryan S also says, thank you. What a similarity to early German Last Supper and Leonardo.
Yeah, not surprisingly. There are commonalities. You could create an entire presentation, of course, just on Last Supper images. And that could probably be quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. Seems like those are all the questions that we have for today. So thank you so much, Eleanor, for such a fascinating and engaging tour. And Ryan S says that could be a good presentation topic for the future. Yes, it would be very interesting, especially seeing different cultures and ramifications
Yeah.
of it all. Michi says, thank you. I enjoyed it also, and I learned new things and saw new works.
Yeah, we can all run out and watch our Netflix Batman and see if we can see Francis Bacon's work.
All right. But before anyone else leaves, I would like to remind you that this tour and other tours are put in the Timken Museum and can be found in our social media channels, our Facebook or YouTube page. If you would like to find further information on any future tours being put on by the Timken Museum, please check out our website events calendar for those details. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you all have a very good day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
All right, I'll be ending the session now. It was very nice to see all of you.